always been a really big proponent of as much surveillance as possible, and rapid surveillance, and rapid, getting products off the market. I certainly got some pushback by my friends in the industry to say, "Well, you're just trying to get more cases," and to be honest with you, that's sort of completely the opposite. The quicker outbreaks are figured out, the quicker along the epidemiological curve and early in the epidemiological curve that you can get at a problem and say there's an outbreak and start the recall process, the less likely it is you're going to have very many people, and certainly the less likely that I'm going to have very many clients. Most outbreaks, if you go back over 20 years of epidemiological curves at the CDC, most outbreaks are figured out long after the outbreak is over, or nearly so. It's on the downward slide of the curve. People are sick, and it's been the consumer who's been the canary in the coal mine to alert that there's an outbreak. And government does, and labs do, and public health does a pretty good job of tracking outbreaks, but we really could do a far better job of coordinating that activity between state and local government and the CDC, FDA, and FSIS to jump on outbreaks sooner, stop them on the upward slide of the curve, and get these outbreaks figured out a lot faster.
You bring up an interesting point, and it leads toward our last question, and that is the social responsibility or the social impacts. So I'll address this question. What are the social impacts of these legal actions for plaintiffs, the food producers, and the food system?
That's an excellent question, and I'd like to start sort of my answer by something that might seem a little counterintuitive for a lawyer who represents victims. But consumers bear responsibility for protecting themselves as well. And when you talked earlier about the sort of the farm to fork example, consumers need to become more educated about the food they consume, and being more aggressively informed about the safety of the food that they consume, and really sort of demand that food be safe. And they also take responsibility for many of the things that we've sort of let go by the wayside. Washing our fruits and vegetables thoroughly, making sure that things are chilled that are supposed to be chilled, or heated appropriately, that when they need to be heated, and to really understand that bacteria and viruses carry enormous risks and enormous financial costs, and certainly in litigation, there have been instances where the defendant has claimed that the plaintiff, the consumer, bears some level of contributory fault for the injury they sustained. And in the right instance, that certainly may be legitimate. For example, perhaps if you and I decided to eat, raw hamburger, and we both got E. coli 0157, a jury probably wouldn't be very sympathetic to that. However, if a 17-year-old kid was cooking a frozen, hamburger patty, and developed hemolytic uremic syndrome and became, paralyzed, a jury would be much more, empathetic to their knowledge of foodborne contaminants. So it is one thing to keep in mind. The legal system does allow for responsibility to shift a bit between the various parties, from the plaintiff, to the retailer, to the shipper, to the grower. The social aspects, social impacts of these outbreaks and litigation on plaintiffs, food producers, and the food system, can be pretty profound. As a lawyer who's taken some $600 million from food producers on behalf of my clients in the last 15 years, that's not an inexpensive proposition, and it does have costs. It has costs, to insurance. It has costs to business reputation. It has costs to sales. Some companies have gone bankrupt because of that. So, the costs can be, very profound. On the other hand, these outbreaks, we look at all the things that have happened because of them. Increased cook temperatures, increased use of pasteurization, leafy green marketing agreement, following the spinach outbreak. And I'm convinced that there'll be some positive results from this horror that we're seeing in the cantaloupe listeria outbreak. But I think having a better understanding of the legal system and how it really operates and the impacts on victims, and that these are real people with real, there's 20 of our friends and neighbors who've been killed by cantaloupe, and they were leading lives, and they're they had important things to do, to be with their families. And I think we really have an obligation to them to try to look at what we can do through the legal system and otherwise to make our food supply safer.
Outstanding. What really struck me was your statement of $600 million in judgments against food producers protecting your clients. In the few minutes that remain, I would like to allow you to advertise your services in appreciation for your participation today. If you'd like to let our listeners know about your services and the types of cases that you entertain.
Well, my law partner, Bruce Clark, who I fought against for 5 years. He was chief counsel for Jack in the Box, formed Marler Clark in 1998 after I successfully prosecuted the Odwalla E. coli outbreak on the West Coast. And since then, Bruce and I and now 6 other lawyers, a total of 8 of us, do nothing but represent victims of foodborne illness across the United States. I also spend about half my time speaking around the world on food safety issues, and I feel that's sort of an obligation that I have to, try to prevent many of these, illnesses from happening again. So we work very hard at what we do, and, the sort of driving force at this point in our career is to try to limit foodborne illness outbreaks so we can, retire gracefully.
Well, Bill, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. You're a busy man. And I'd like to close with sincere appreciation from our group for your legal expertise and your outstanding efforts to help both plaintiffs and actually help refine the food production process and improve our food system.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you very much. And we'll now close this session. A big thank you to all our listeners.